Well, that's just the first serving. A supersized fight for supersized wages that'll be going on pretty much all week into next week. Fast food workers backed by union groups walking off the job, turning up the volume. David Lee Miller in Lower Manhattan. David Lee.
Neil, not clear is precisely how many fast food workers today actually walked off the job. We are in Lower Manhattan right now, and a rally is expected to get underway within the next half hour. There have been a number of rallies throughout the day here in New York and throughout the country. The demonstrators demanding that the minimum wage, specifically for fast food workers, be raised from $7.25 to $15 an hour. At a rally in Brooklyn late this morning, there were a few tense moments when demonstrators tried to force their way into a Wendy's. They were ultimately stopped by security. The overwhelming number of the demonstrators appear to be from various unions and special interest groups. The PR firm hired by the organizers lists among its clients some of the most powerful unions in the country. So how many of the demonstrators actually work at fast food restaurants? Well, it's difficult to tell, but a McDonald's employee that we talked with at a rally this morning in Midtown did say that the $7.25 wage is simply not enough to live on. Listen.
I believe this company is a large company, and they can't afford to pay $15 an hour. They make $1 billion a year, and they can't afford.
The National Restaurant Association, meanwhile, says only 5% of restaurant employees make the federal minimum wage. The group says that raising the minimum pay would cost jobs, especially in light of the impact caused by Obamacare. And according to one university study, hiking the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, would cost nearly 500,000 jobs. The lobbying group, Union Facts, says that raising the minimum wage is simply unrealistic. Listen.
You can't just translate your need for more money onto every business and say, I've got 3 kids to feed, so you need to pay me more. That's not how the compensation system works in this country.
And as best we could tell, most fast food businesses today were conducting business as usual. It appeared that if there was any impact from this so-called strike, Neil, it was minimal. Back to you.
David Lee Miller, thank you very much. So how real, how palpable is this rage? Herman Cain says, considering who's funding these protests, one has to wonder. Of course, Herman, the former presidential candidate, CEO of Godfather's Pizza, a guy who for 20 years was running the entire fast food industry and stayed thin. Think of that. All right, so, Herman, you hear and see what's going on here. How many of those who are protesting are fast food workers, and how many just might be union plants? I sometimes wonder.
Neil, I believe that most of them are union plants because my experience with minimum wage workers, having led the National Restaurant Association, is that most of them appreciate those jobs, and here's why. They are not minimum wage jobs, they are starting jobs. And what never comes through the liberal rhetoric is the fact that most people who start at minimum wage, if they do a good job, they get increases within 6 months. And the other thing that never comes through in the midst of all of the noise that they are trying to make is the fact that if you've artificially forced the minimum wage to go up, like David said, there would be job losses. The losers would be the minimum wage workers or the potential workers and the consumers, because any prices would be passed on to the consumers. The only winners in these protests are the unions.
You're right to say, Herman, that these are starting wages, but what if we don't just start them a little higher? You say what?
Well, you could start them a little higher, but that means that we are going to hire a little fewer. That's just the fact of the matter. I mean, businesses are going to try to figure out a way to stay in business if they can. The biggest misconception, Neil, is that businesses don't want to pay more than the minimum wage because they are cheap. That's not the case. Most of the businesses that hire minimum wage workers are trying to stay in business. They would love to pay them more.
And Herman, aren't a lot of them, it's one thing to go to McDonald's and Burger King thinking you're going after this monolith that has all this money, but the fact of the matter is, these are all franchise type operations.
Yes.
So it's the franchisees who are not these big behemoths. It's down to actually, you know, hundreds, thousands of small enterprises that are responsible for these workers, right?
That's a great point. Every restaurant is an independent business, and if it can't stand on its own 2 feet in terms of its ability to make money, that unit will close. People think that because McDonald's is a big corporation and they report big profits, that trickles all the way down to an individual unit. No, it does not. Every unit is treated like an individual small business, and they simply just cannot drive those wages up to $15. Let me tell you, let me just add one other thing, Neil. They can keep pushing for $15 if they want to. And if eventually they get it for whatever reason, and I don't think that that's how it ought to come about, pretty soon you're going to be going into a fast food restaurant, and instead of a human being asking you, do you want fries with that, you're going to have a robot going, do you want fries with that? Because businesses are going to figure out a way to stay in business, and they're going to move more and more toward automation if they have to.
By the way, they're now working on unionizing those machines. All right, thank you, my friend Herman Cain. Well, we interrupt this fast food fight for an even faster moving doozy of a storm. We track it down. You might want to bundle up.